In the dusty mechanics bay of a military outpost, with a scent of gun oil mixed with desert sand, a young woman's steady hands worked with practiced precision. She had no idea that the small piece of fabric sewn onto her uniform sleeve would change the course of her life forever. Sometimes the smallest details carry the weight of the greatest secrets, and sometimes a single moment of recognition can unravel years of carefully constructed lies. What started as routine weapon maintenance would become a deadly game of cat and mouse, where trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, and survival meant keeping her true identity hidden from those who would kill her without hesitation. But when a general's sharp eyes caught sight of something that shouldn't exist, her carefully built world began to crumble, one thread at a time. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as Sarah Mitchell knelt beside her assigned weapon, an M4 carbine that had seen better days. The metal was warm to the touch, heated by the relentless Afghan sun that seemed to bake everything in sight. She had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman for 6 months now, and the routine of weapon maintenance had become as natural as breathing. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, disassembling the rifle piece by piece. The barrel came free with a soft click, followed by the bolt carrier group. Each component was laid out in perfect order on the worn canvas mat beneath her knees. Around her, other soldiers performed similar tasks, their conversations a low murmur that mixed with the distant sound of helicopters and the occasional bark of orders from the drill sergeant. Sarah had always been meticulous about her equipment. Growing up on her grandfather's farm in rural Montana, she had learned early that tools were only as good as the care you gave them. Her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran, had taught her that a well-maintained weapon could mean the difference between coming home and becoming a casualty. Those lessons had served her well during basic training and even better here in the field. She reached for the cleaning rod, her movements automatic and sure. The bore brush attached with a twist, and she began the methodical process of cleaning the barrel. Push, twist, pull. Push, twist, pull. The rhythm was almost meditative, allowing her mind to wander to thoughts of home. Her mother's letters had become less frequent lately, and she wondered if the small-town gossip mill was still churning about her sudden decision to enlist. The truth was, Sarah had needed to disappear, not in the dramatic way of movies or novels, but in the quiet, desperate way of someone running from a past that threatened to destroy everything she held dear. The Army had offered her that escape, along with a new identity and a chance to start over. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell was a far cry from the person she had been before, and she intended to keep it that way. A shadow fell across her workspace, and Sarah looked up to see Private Rodriguez approaching with a grin. Maria Rodriguez was one of the few people on base who had managed to break through Sarah's carefully constructed walls. The young woman from Texas had a way of making friends wherever she went, and her infectious laugh had become a bright spot in the otherwise harsh environment of military life. "Hey, Mitchell," Maria said, settling down beside her with her own weapon. "You're looking mighty serious over there. Bad news from home." Sarah shook her head, returning her attention to the cleaning process. "Just focused on the job. This thing's been giving me trouble on the range." "Well, if anyone can fix it, it's you," Maria replied, beginning her own disassembly process. "I swear, you know more about weapons than half the armory staff. Where'd you learn all that?" The question sent a small chill down Sarah's spine. She had become skilled at deflecting inquiries about her past, but Maria's casual curiosity always seemed to catch her off guard. "My grandfather taught me," she said, which was true enough. "He was military, too." "That's cool. My dad was Navy." served on destroyers for 20 years before he retired, and opened a garage. Maria's hands paused in their work. Speaking of dads, did I tell you mine sent me some of my mom's cooking? She made enough tamales to feed half the base and froze them for shipping. Want some? Sarah smiled despite herself. Maria's generosity was legendary among their unit, and she had a way of mothering everyone around her despite being only 22 years old. That sounds amazing. The mess hall food is starting to all taste the same. Everything tastes like cardboard after a while out here, Maria agreed. But wait until you try my mom's tamales. She uses this secret spice blend that she got from her grandmother, who got it from her grandmother. It's been in the family for generations. The conversation continued as they worked, Maria sharing stories about her large extended family, while Sarah listened and offered appropriate responses. She had become skilled at being a good listener, asking questions that kept the focus on others while revealing little about herself. It was a survival mechanism she had developed long before joining the Army. But it served her well in this environment where personal details were often shared freely among soldiers who relied on each other for their lives. As Sarah cleaned the last components of her rifle, she noticed a small tear in the fabric of her uniform sleeve. The desert environment was harsh on equipment and clothing alike, and she made a mental note to visit the supply sergeant for a replacement. The emblem sewn onto the sleeve was barely visible through the tear, but she could make out the distinctive shape that marked her as belonging to a specific unit. The emblem was small, no larger than a silver dollar, and embroidered in muted colors that blended with the desert camouflage pattern of her uniform. To most people, it would appear to be nothing more than a standard military insignia, one of dozens that soldiers wore to identify their various qualifications and assignments. But Sarah knew better. The emblem represented something far more significant than military service, and its presence on her uniform was both a source of pride and a constant reminder of the danger she lived with every day. She had sewn the emblem onto her sleeve herself, using a small sewing kit her mother had given her before deployment. The process had been painstaking, each stitch carefully placed to ensure the design was perfect. It was a risk, she knew, but one she felt compelled to take. The emblem connected her to something larger than herself, something that gave meaning to her presence in this desolate place. As she began reassembling her rifle, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the events that had brought her to this point. The decision to enlist had not been made lightly, and the months of training that followed had tested her in ways she had never imagined. But she had persevered, driven by a sense of purpose that went beyond personal survival or patriotic duty. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts, and she looked up to see Sergeant First Class Williams walking toward their group. Williams was a career soldier with 15 years of service, and his no-nonsense approach to leadership had earned him the respect of everyone in the unit. He was also one of the few people on base who seemed to notice details that others missed. "Mitchell, Rodriguez," Williams said, stopping beside their workspace. "How are those weapons coming along?" "Almost finished, Sergeant," Sarah replied, snapping the upper and lower receivers back together with a satisfying click. "Just need a function check, and we'll be good to go." Williams nodded, his eyes scanning the disassembled weapons and cleaning supplies. "Good. We've got a patrol scheduled for this afternoon, and I want everyone's equipment in perfect condition. Intelligence suggests increased insurgent activity in our sector, so we need to be ready for anything." The mention of insurgent activity sent a familiar tightness through Sarah's chest. Every patrol carried risks, but recent intelligence reports had indicated a significant increase in enemy movement throughout their area of operations. The Taliban and other militant groups had been probing coalition defenses, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. "Any specific threats we should know about?" Maria asked, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by professional concern. "Nothing concrete," Williams replied. "But there have been reports of new fighters moving into the area, possibly foreign nationals with advanced training. Command wants us to maintain heightened alertness until further notice." Sarah nodded, continuing her function check routine. The mention of foreign fighters was particularly troubling, as it suggested the enemy was bringing in specialized personnel for a specific operation. Her background had given her insights into how such operations were typically planned and executed, knowledge that could prove valuable if properly applied. As Williams moved on to check other soldiers' equipment, Sarah found herself thinking about the intelligence briefings she had attended over the past few weeks. The pattern of enemy activity suggested something larger than routine harassment operations, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what that might be. Her instincts, honed by years of experience before joining the Army, told her that something significant was being planned. The afternoon patrol would take them through a village that had been relatively quiet in recent months, but Sarah knew that appearances could be deceiving. The enemy was skilled at blending into civilian populations, using seemingly peaceful areas as bases for planning and staging attacks. Her role as a regular soldier limited her ability to gather intelligence in the way she once had, but she remained alert to signs that others might miss. As she completed her weapon maintenance and packed away her cleaning supplies, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the polished metal of her rifle's receiver. The face looking back at her was weathered by months of desert sun and wind, but the eyes remained sharp and watchful. They were the eyes of someone who had seen more than her official military record would suggest, someone who carried secrets that could not be shared with even her closest friends. The torn sleeve of her uniform fluttered slightly in the hot breeze, and Sarah made another mental note to get it repaired before the next inspection. The last thing she needed was unwanted attention from officers who might look too closely at the details of her appearance. She had worked too hard to build her cover identity to let something as simple as a damaged uniform give her away. Maria finished her own weapon maintenance and stood up, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from kneeling on the hard ground. "Ready for some of those tamales?" she asked with a grin. "I've got them warming up in the MWR tent." Sarah nodded, shouldering her rifle and following her friend toward the morale, welfare, and recreation tent where soldiers often gathered during their free time. The tent was filled with the usual assortment of soldiers playing cards, writing letters, or simply trying to escape the heat. The smell of Maria's tamales filled the air, a welcome change from the usual odors of fuel, dust, and cooking oil that permeated the base. As they settled down to eat, Sarah allowed herself to relax slightly. These moments of normalcy were precious in an environment where death could come suddenly and without warning. She had learned to treasure the simple pleasures of friendship and good food, knowing that such things could disappear in an instant. But even as she laughed at Maria's stories and enjoyed the taste of home-cooked food, Sarah remained alert to her surroundings. Her eyes regularly scanned the tent, noting the positions of exits and the behavior of other soldiers. It was a habit that had kept her alive before joining the Army, and she saw no reason to abandon it now. The emblem on her torn sleeve seemed to pulse with significance as she ate, a constant reminder of the dual life she lived. To her fellow soldiers, she was simply Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, a dedicated soldier with a talent for weapons maintenance and a mysterious past. But the emblem told a different story, one that connected her to operations and organizations that officially did not exist. As the afternoon wore on and the time for patrol approached, Sarah felt the familiar mix of anticipation and apprehension that preceded every mission. The intelligence warnings about increased enemy activity weighed on her mind, but she pushed aside her concerns and focused on the immediate tasks at hand. Whatever dangers awaited them in the village, she would face them as she always had, with skill, determination, and the hope that her carefully guarded secrets would remain hidden for another day. The torn sleeve would need to be repaired soon, she reminded herself as she prepared her equipment for the patrol. In the harsh environment of a military base, even the smallest details could have the largest consequences, and Sarah had no intention of letting her guard down now. The Emblem had brought her this far, and she was determined to see her mission through to the end, whatever that might bring. The convoy rolled through the dusty streets of Kalat village as the sun reached its zenith, casting everything in harsh, bright light that made the mud brick buildings shimmer like mirages. Sarah sat in the second Humvee, her rifle ready, and her eyes scanning the seemingly peaceful scene outside. Children played in the narrow alleyways between houses, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension she felt building in her chest. Something was wrong. She couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but her instincts were screaming warnings that she had learned never to ignore. The village seemed too quiet, too normal. In her experience, genuine normalcy and staged normalcy had different rhythms, different energies, and this felt carefully orchestrated. "Mitchell, you see anything out there?" Sergeant Williams' voice crackled through her headset from the lead vehicle. Sarah keyed her radio. "Negative, Sergeant, but something feels off. Too many military-age males hanging around the tea shops, and I haven't seen any women on the streets." "Copy that. Stay alert." The patrol continued deeper into the village, following a route they had used dozens of times before. Sarah noted the positions of the men Williams had mentioned, marking their locations and behavior patterns in her mind. 2 near the mosque, 3 outside what appeared to be a mechanic's shop, another 4 clustered around a fruit vendor's cart. Their casual poses didn't fool her. She recognized the way trained fighters try to blend into civilian environments. Maria, sitting across from her in the Humvee, noticed her tension. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just keeping my eyes open," Sarah replied, adjusting her grip on her rifle. Remember what Williams said about increased activity. The convoy came to a stop near the village center, where they planned to conduct a routine security check and meet with the local elder. As soldiers began dismounting from their vehicles, Sarah felt that familiar prickle of electricity that preceded combat. She had experienced it countless times before in places and situations that her official record would never reflect. General Harrison Marcus arrived at Forward Operating Base Chapman that morning in a cloud of dust and bureaucratic efficiency. The 3-star general was conducting what the military bureaucracy called a leadership assessment visit, but everyone on base knew it was really an inspection designed to find fault and assign blame for recent operational setbacks. Marcus was a career officer with 32 years of service, a man who had risen through the ranks during peacetime and now found himself managing a war he didn't fully understand. His sharp eyes missed nothing, and his reputation for ending careers with a single negative report preceded him wherever he went. The soldiers at Chapman had spent the previous week cleaning, organizing, and rehearsing responses to the questions they expected him to ask. Sarah had returned from the village patrol late in the afternoon. Her suspicions about enemy activity confirmed when they discovered a cache of improvised explosive devices hidden in an abandoned building. The intelligence had been passed up the chain of command, but She knew that such information often got lost in the bureaucratic maze of military reporting. She was back at her workspace, performing post-patrol maintenance on her rifle, when she heard the distinctive sound of a helicopter approaching. The general's arrival had been announced earlier, but the timing meant that most soldiers would be focused on their equipment and duties rather than putting on a show for their visitor. The tear in her uniform sleeve had worsened during the patrol, and now a larger portion of the emblem was visible through the frayed fabric. Sarah made a mental note to visit supply immediately after completing her weapon maintenance, but for now she was more concerned with ensuring her rifle was properly cleaned and ready for the next mission. General Marcus made his way through the base with his small entourage of aides and security personnel, stopping at various stations to observe soldiers at work. His visits were brief but intense, his questions sharp, and his expectations clear. He had a reputation for being able to spot problems that others missed, and his presence made even veteran soldiers nervous. Sarah was field stripping her rifle for the second time that day when she became aware of approaching footsteps. She glanced up briefly to see the general's party moving in her direction, but she continued her work without interruption. Military protocol demanded that she stop and render proper courtesy, but the timing of her maintenance cycle required her full attention. "What's your assessment of readiness in this sector, Sergeant?" General Marcus asked Sergeant Williams, who was accompanying the inspection party. "Sir, our soldiers are well trained, and their equipment is properly maintained," Williams replied. "We've had success in recent operations, including today's discovery of an IED cache that intelligence suggests was intended for use against coalition forces." The general nodded, his eyes scanning the soldiers at work. Individual readiness is the foundation of unit readiness. How do you ensure that each soldier maintains proper standards? As the conversation continued, Sarah focused on reassembling her rifle. The bolt carrier group slid into place with a satisfying click, followed by the charging handle and buffer spring. Her movements were smooth and efficient, the result of countless hours of practice and genuine familiarity with the weapon system. "Mitchell," Sergeant Williams called out, "show the general your rifle maintenance technique." Sarah looked up from her work, seeing the general's sharp eyes focused on her for the first time. She came to attention and rendered the appropriate salute, which was returned with military precision. "Sir, I was just completing post-patrol maintenance on my M4, she said, gesturing to the partially assembled weapon on the mat before her. The weapon performed flawlessly during today's mission, but desert conditions require extra attention to prevent sand and dust contamination. General Marcus stepped closer, studying her work area with the practiced eye of someone who had inspected thousands of soldiers over the course of his career. Sarah's equipment was laid out in perfect order, each component clean and properly positioned. Her movements as she continued the reassembly process were confident and precise. "Where did you learn weapons maintenance, Sergeant?" the general asked. "My grandfather taught me the basics, sir." He was a Vietnam veteran. The Army refined those skills during training and through practical application. The general nodded approvingly. "Practical experience is invaluable. What's your assessment of enemy activity in this sector?" Sarah paused in her work, considering her response carefully. "Sir, today's patrol revealed signs of increased organization and planning among hostile forces. The IED cache we discovered was professionally constructed and strategically positioned. Intelligence suggests foreign fighters may be providing training and leadership to local insurgents." "Interesting observation," the general said. "What makes you think the devices were professionally constructed?" This was dangerous territory, Sarah realized. Her analysis was based on experience and knowledge that went far beyond what a typical Army sergeant should possess. She needed to phrase her response carefully to avoid raising questions about her background. The placement patterns and construction techniques showed a level of sophistication beyond what we've typically encountered from local insurgents, sir. The devices were concealed using methods that suggested familiarity with coalition detection procedures. As she spoke, Sarah continued reassembling her rifle, her hands working automatically while her mind focused on the conversation. The general's questions were probing deeper than she had expected, and she could sense his sharp intelligence evaluating not just her words, but her entire demeanor. It was at that moment that a gust of desert wind caught her torn sleeve, causing the fabric to flutter and exposing more of the emblem underneath. The movement was subtle, lasting only a few seconds, but it occurred directly in the general's line of sight. Sarah saw his eyes focus on her sleeve with sudden intensity, and she felt her blood turn to ice. The general's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. She continued her work, fighting to keep her hands steady while her mind raced through possibilities and contingencies. "That's an interesting insignia on your sleeve, Sergeant," the general said casually. "I'm not familiar with that particular emblem." Sarah glanced down at her torn sleeve, seeing what the general had spotted. Through the frayed fabric, the distinctive shape and colors of the emblem were clearly visible. To most observers, it would appear to be nothing more than a military patch, but she could tell from the general's tone that he recognized it for what it really was. "It's a unit patch, sir, from my previous assignment." "Previous assignment?" The general's voice remained conversational, but Sarah detected an underlying tension. "Your service record indicates you've been with this unit since completing basic training." The statement hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Sarah realized that the general had done his homework before conducting this inspection, familiarizing himself with the personnel files of the soldiers he would be meeting. Her cover story, which had held up under routine scrutiny, was about to be tested at a level she hadn't prepared for. "Sir, I may have misspoken. I was referring to a training unit during advanced individual training." General Marcus studied her face with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Sarah maintained her military bearing, but she could feel sweat forming beneath her uniform despite the relative coolness of the late afternoon air. The emblem seemed to burn against her arm, a small piece of fabric that threatened to unravel everything she had worked to build. "Complete your maintenance, Sergeant," the general said finally. "I'd like to speak with you privately after you've finished." Sarah's heart rate spiked, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir." The general moved on with his inspection party, but Sarah could feel his attention lingering on her even as he engaged in conversation with other soldiers. She completed the reassembly of her rifle with mechanical precision, her mind working furiously to develop a strategy for the upcoming private conversation. Maria, who had been working quietly nearby, leaned over once the inspection party was out of earshot. "What was that about? The general seemed really interested in your patch." "I'm not sure," Sarah replied, which was technically true. She wasn't sure exactly what the general knew or suspected, but she was certain that her carefully constructed cover identity was in serious jeopardy. Probably just curious about unit history. But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew they rang false. General Marcus's reaction had been too specific, too focused to be mere curiosity. He had recognized the emblem for what it was, and that recognition changed everything about her situation. She stood up and shouldered her rifle, checking to ensure all her equipment was properly secured. The torn sleeve fluttered again in the breeze, and She made a silent promise to herself that this would be the last time the emblem would be exposed. Whatever happened in the upcoming conversation with the general, she would need to find a way to repair or replace the uniform before anyone else noticed the significance of what lay beneath the frayed fabric. As she walked toward the designated meeting area, Sarah's mind shifted into the analytical mode that had kept her alive through countless dangerous situations. The general's knowledge of her service record suggested he had access to official databases, but the recognition of the emblem indicated familiarity with organizations and operations that existed outside normal military channels. She had two primary options: continue to maintain her cover story and hope to convince the general that his suspicions were unfounded, or reveal enough of the truth to satisfy his curiosity while protecting the deeper secrets of her real identity and mission. Both approaches carried significant risks, but the alternative of being exposed completely was unacceptable. The sun was beginning to set over the Afghan mountains, casting long shadows across the base and painting the sky in shades of orange and red. In a few hours, the base would be secured for the night, and the routine of evening duties would begin. But Sarah knew that her routine was about to be permanently altered by whatever transpired in her conversation with General Marcus. She thought about Maria's tamales and their easy friendship, about Sergeant Williams's trust in her abilities, about the other soldiers who had come to rely on her skills and experience. All of that was now at risk because of a torn piece of fabric and a sharp-eyed general who noticed details that others missed. The meeting area was a small building near the command center, typically used for briefings and administrative functions. As Sarah approached, she saw General Marcus waiting inside, alone except for a single aide who stood near the door. The general's expression was unreadable, but his posture suggested a man preparing for a difficult conversation. Sarah entered the building, came to attention, and waited for permission to speak. The general studied her for a long moment before gesturing to a chair across from his temporary desk. "Sit down, Sergeant Mitchell. We have some things to discuss." As Sarah took the indicated seat, she caught sight of her reflection in the window behind the general's desk. The torn sleeve was clearly visible, and she could make out the distinctive colors and patterns of the emblem that had started this chain of events. In the fading light of the Afghan sunset, it seemed to glow with an ominous significance that promised to change her life forever. The general opened a file folder on his desk, and Sarah recognized it as her official service record. But beside it lay another folder, thicker and marked with security classifications that made her stomach clench with recognition. Whatever was about to happen, she realized the general had come prepared with more than just routine questions about her military service. "Tell me about the emblem on your sleeve, Sergeant," General Marcus said quietly. "And this time, I'd like the truth." Sarah stared at the classified folder beside her service record, her mind calculating probabilities and responses at lightning speed. The weight of 3 years of carefully constructed lies pressed down on her shoulders as she met General Marcus's steady gaze. In the silence that stretched between them, she could hear the distant sound of evening prayers from the nearby village and the rhythmic hum of generators that powered the base. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand the question," she said finally, buying herself precious seconds to think. General Marcus leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Sergeant, I've been in the intelligence community for longer than you've been alive. That emblem on your sleeve belongs to Task Force Omega, a joint CIA military unit that officially doesn't exist. The last time I saw that particular insignia was on the uniform of a dead operative in Kosovo 12 years ago." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Task Force Omega had been her life for 6 years before she joined the Army. 6 years of operations that had taken her to places the American public would never know existed. The fact that General Marcus not only recognized the emblem, but knew its history meant that her situation was far more complicated than she had initially realized. "Sir, with respect, I think there may be some confusion about my patch. It's from a training unit, Agent Rebecca Chun," that the general interrupted, opening the classified folder and reading from a document inside. Born in San Francisco, recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency at age 23 while pursuing a graduate degree in international relations at Georgetown University. Specialized in deep cover operations and foreign language acquisition. Fluent in Mandarin, Arabic, Farsi, and Pashto. Presumed killed in action during Operation Nightfall in Syria 3 years ago. Sarah's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. The sound of her real name, spoken aloud after 3 years of being Sarah Mitchell, sent shockwaves through her system. She had worked so hard to bury Rebecca Chun that hearing the name felt like listening to someone speak about a ghost. "Rebecca Chun is dead," she said quietly. "She died in Aleppo when a safe house was compromised. The records are accurate." "The records show what we wanted them to show," General Marcus replied, closing the folder. "But dead operatives don't typically maintain emotional connections to their former organizations. Dead operatives certainly don't sew classified insignia onto their military uniforms." The accusation hung in the air between them, and Sarah realized that denial was no longer an option. The general knew too much, had access to information that should have been buried so deep that even high-level military officers couldn't access it. Her cover wasn't just blown, it had been systematically dismantled by someone with resources and knowledge she hadn't anticipated. "Why?" she asked, abandoning her cover story entirely. "Why expose me now? I've been serving honorably, completing my missions, staying under the radar." "Because the situation has changed," the general said, his tone becoming more businesslike. "The intelligence you provided about foreign fighters in this sector was remarkably accurate. Too accurate for a regular Army sergeant to have gathered through routine patrol observations. You identified construction techniques and tactical patterns that suggest extensive knowledge of insurgent operations." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "You've been watching me. Task Force Omega may officially not exist, but its personnel records are maintained by people who understand their value. When Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell began demonstrating operational awareness beyond her supposed training and experience, certain flags were raised." The general stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the base as evening settled over the compound. "The truth is, Agent Chun, we need Rebecca back. The situation in this region is deteriorating faster than public reports indicate, and we're facing threats that conventional military responses aren't equipped to handle." "Rebecca Chun died in Syria," Sarah repeated, though with less conviction than before. "She's buried under 3 years of military service and a carefully constructed identity. Bringing her back would compromise everything I've worked to build." "What you've built is impressive," the general acknowledged, turning back to face her. "Sarah Mitchell is a dedicated soldier with an exemplary record. But we both know that dedication comes from something deeper than patriotic duty. The emblem on your sleeve proves that." Sarah looked down at the torn fabric that had started this entire conversation. The small piece of thread and color that seemed so insignificant when she first sewed it onto her uniform had become the key that unlocked a door she had tried to keep sealed. "I sewed it on as a memorial," she said quietly, "for the people who died because of choices I made, for the missions that went wrong and the assets were compromised. I never intended for it to be discovered. But you couldn't let go completely, the general observed. Even in your new identity, you needed that connection to who you used to be. That's what makes you valuable, Agent Shun. Your loyalty, your commitment, your inability to walk away from the mission even when walking away would be safer. Sarah felt a familiar weight settling on her shoulders, the weight of responsibility and secrets that had defined her life before Sarah Mitchell existed. She thought about Maria and her tamales, about Sergeant Williams and his trust, about the simple pleasure of maintaining weapons and following orders without the constant calculation of risk and deception that had characterized her previous life. "What kind of mission?" she asked, and immediately regretted the question. By asking, she was admitting that Rebecca Chin wasn't as dead as she had claimed, that the possibility of resurrection existed if the circumstances were compelling enough. General Marcus returned to his seat and opened another folder, this one filled with photographs and intelligence reports. 6 weeks ago, we lost contact with a deep cover asset in Pakistan. Dr. Hassan Malik, a nuclear physicist who had been feeding us information about Pakistani black market uranium sales. His last transmission indicated that a new player had entered the market, someone with connections to both foreign governments and terrorist organizations. Sarah studied the photographs as the general spread them across the desk. Dr. Malik appeared to be in his 50s, with the soft appearance of an academic who spent more time with books than physical activity. But his eyes held the wariness of someone living a double life, a look she recognized from her own reflection during her years as an operative. "Where do I fit in?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Dr. Malik's handler was compromised in a related operation. "We need someone with your language skills and operational experience to make contact, extract him if possible, and gather intelligence about this new uranium dealer. The mission would require you to assume a cover identity that could believably operate in the region." Sarah laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "You want me to go from Army sergeant to international arms dealer in what, a matter of weeks? The kind of cover identity you're talking about takes months to develop and years to make believable." "We have something better than time," the general replied, pulling out another photograph. "We have opportunity." 3 days ago, customs officials in Dubai intercepted a shipment of counterfeit antiquities being smuggled by someone named Rebecca Martinez, an art dealer from Los Angeles. The real Rebecca Martinez died in a car accident 2 years ago, but someone has been using her identity for black market transactions throughout the Middle East. Understanding clicked into place as Sarah studied the photograph of the woman who had been arrested in Dubai. The physical resemblance was striking, close enough that with the right preparation and documentation, she could assume the identity without raising suspicions among people who had dealt with the fake Rebecca Martinez. "You want me to become a dead woman impersonating another dead woman," Sarah said, "and somehow use that identity to infiltrate a uranium smuggling network and extract an asset whose handler has been compromised. The complexity of the situation provides opportunities for manipulation," the general agreed. "Rebecca Martinez's arrest creates a vacuum in the regional black market. Someone with her connections and reputation could step in to fill that void, especially if they had the right introduction." Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the base where fellow soldiers were going about their evening routines. In a few hours, she would normally be checking her equipment for the next day's patrol, writing letters to fictional relatives, or sharing stories with Maria and the others who had become her surrogate family. "What happens to Sarah Mitchell?" she asked. "Sarah Mitchell receives emergency leave due to a family crisis," the general replied. "Her grandmother is seriously ill." requiring immediate travel back to the States. She'll be temporarily reassigned to administrative duties while family matters are resolved. The cover story was plausible, Sarah realized. She had mentioned her grandfather frequently enough that a family emergency would seem natural to her fellow soldiers. The administrative reassignment would explain her absence from regular duties without raising questions about her status or location. And if the mission goes badly, if Rebecca Martinez gets burned or killed, then Sarah Mitchell's grandmother takes a turn for the worse, requiring extended family leave, the general said pragmatically. Eventually, she might decide that military service isn't compatible with her family responsibilities, leading to an honorable discharge and return to civilian life. Sarah turned back to face the general, seeing him clearly for the first time since their conversation began. He wasn't just a military officer conducting an inspection. He was a player in the same shadow world that had claimed 6 years of her life before she tried to escape. His knowledge of Task Force Omega, his access to classified files, his ability to construct complex cover stories on short notice, all pointed to connections that went far beyond conventional military channels. "Who are you really?" she asked. "Someone who understands the value of assets like you," he replied. "Someone who knows that the war on terror isn't going to be won by conventional forces alone. We need people who can operate in the spaces between official policy and necessary action." The admission confirmed what Sarah had suspected. General Marcus was more than a military officer. He was a coordinator, someone who managed assets and operations across multiple agencies and organizations. His inspection of forward operating base Chapman hadn't been routine at all. It had been a recruitment mission disguised as administrative oversight. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "Dr. Malik's situation is deteriorating rapidly. Intelligence indicates that his cover may already be compromised, and we're running out of time to extract him before he's discovered. You would need to be in Dubai within 72 hours to assume the Rebecca Martinez identity before the authorities realize she's not who she appears to be. 72 hours to resurrect a dead woman and abandon a carefully constructed life." Sarah thought about the torn emblem on her sleeve, the small piece of fabric that had started this chain of events. She had sewn it on as a memorial, but perhaps it had really been a beacon, a signal to the world that Rebecca Chen wasn't as dead as her files indicated. "I need guarantees," she said finally. "Protection for the people here who have become important to me. Maria Rodriguez, Sergeant Williams, the others who might ask questions about my sudden departure. Their safety isn't negotiable." Agreed. Their records will reflect nothing more than routine interaction with a fellow soldier who had a family emergency. No questions will be asked and no investigations will be conducted. Sarah nodded, knowing that her decision had already been made the moment she sewed the Task Force Omega emblem onto her uniform sleeve. She had tried to leave that world behind, but the world hadn't been willing to let her go. Rebecca Chun had been dormant, not dead, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge from the carefully constructed grave of Sarah Mitchell's identity. "I'll need a full briefing on Dr. Malik's situation, complete background materials on Rebecca Martinez, and operational support once I'm in the field," she said, slipping back into the professional tone that had characterized her years as an intelligence operative. "Everything will be provided," the general assured her. "A team is already preparing your transition materials, and support assets are being positioned throughout the region." As if on cue, there was a soft knock on the door. The general's aide entered and placed a sealed envelope on the desk before withdrawing without a word. General Marcus handed the envelope to Sarah, who recognized the weight and feel of travel documents and identity papers. Rebecca Martinez's passport, driver's license, credit cards, and business credentials, the general explained. The real Rebecca Martinez was thorough in establishing her cover identity before her death. We've simply updated the necessary information to reflect current circumstances. Sarah opened the envelope and studied the documents inside. The photograph on the passport was clearly her, though taken recently enough that she had no memory of the session. The level of detail in the supporting materials was impressive, suggesting that contingency plans for her recruitment had been in place for some time. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "Since the day Task Force Omega reported you killed in action," the general replied. "Your death was too convenient, too clean for someone with your training and instincts. We maintained surveillance assets throughout your transition to military service, waiting for the right opportunity to bring you back." The revelation that she had never truly escaped, that her carefully constructed new life had been monitored and managed from the beginning, should have angered her. Instead, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. The constant vigilance, the careful maintenance of her cover story, the isolation from meaningful connections, all of it could finally be set aside in favor of the direct action that had always been her strength. "When do I leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning. A military transport will take you to Bagram, where you'll board a civilian flight to Dubai. By tomorrow evening, Rebecca Chun will officially cease to exist for the second time, and Rebecca Martinez will take her place." Sarah stood, tucking the envelope of identity documents into her uniform pocket. The torn sleeve fluttered one last time in the evening breeze, and she made a mental note to cut the emblem from the fabric before disposing of the uniform. Sarah Mitchell would have no need for Task Force Omega insignia, and Rebecca Martinez would carry her own symbols of identity. "I'll need to speak with my unit about the family emergency," she said. "They deserve an explanation, even if it's not the complete truth." "Of course, but remember that from this moment forward, every word you speak and every action you take will be evaluated for its impact on operational security. Rebecca Chun is about to be resurrected, and her mission will affect regional stability and American national security." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with her decision. As she walked toward the door, she caught sight of her reflection in the window one last time. The woman looking back at her was no longer Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, dedicated soldier with a mysterious past. She was Rebecca Chun, intelligence operative preparing to assume another woman's identity in pursuit of a mission that could prevent nuclear materials from falling into terrorist hands. The emblem on her sleeve, barely visible through the torn fabric, seemed to pulse with approval. It had served its purpose, bridging the gap between her old life and the new mission that awaited her. Tomorrow, it would be cut away and destroyed, but its significance would remain embedded in her memory as a reminder of the connections that transcended official records and bureaucratic designations. As she stepped out into the Afghan night, Sarah felt the familiar electricity of impending action coursing through her system. Rebecca Chun was coming back to life, and the world was about to become a much more dangerous place for everyone involved in the uranium smuggling network that had made the mistake of attracting American attention. The torn sleeve fluttered one last time in the desert wind, carrying with it the last vestiges of Sarah Mitchell's carefully constructed anonymity. By tomorrow night, she would be someone else entirely, operating in a world where identities were currency and survival depended on the ability to become whoever the mission required. But first, she had to say goodbye to Maria and her tamales, to Sergeant Williams and his trust, to the simple pleasures of military life that she would soon leave behind. They deserved better than the lies she was about to tell them, but they also deserved protection from the truth that would put them in danger. As Sarah walked back toward her unit's area, she began composing the story of her grandmother's sudden illness, the family emergency that would explain her departure and protect the people who had become important to her. It would be convincing because it needed to be, and it would be final because Rebecca Chun never looked back once a mission began. The emblem had done its work, and tomorrow would be nothing more than threads and die in an incinerator at Bagram Air Base. But its legacy would continue in the form of a woman who had learned to die and be reborn as circumstances required, a woman whose dedication to the mission transcended the boundaries of official identity and bureaucratic convenience. Rebecca Martinez was about to make her entrance onto the world stage, and the reverberations of that performance would be felt from Dubai to Islamabad to the highest levels of American intelligence. The small piece of fabric that started it all would be gone, but its significance would echo through every choice she made in the dangerous days ahead.